Relax a bit, eat some yummy food. What's on your minds right now? Talked about a lot of stuff this morning. Reflections.
I had a question earlier that I'd written down. The things I find myself running into is, we've been working on trying to get mission communities off the ground, and we've got a couple that are going. One of them is pretty strong. Another one's still kind of on the runway, but their engines are at least going. But in my group, I've got several people who I view high leadership potential. So my group needs to be more than one group. But I realize we're not quite ready to multiply yet. I've been trying to imprint as much missional DNA into people as I can. But I'm also I've got another leadership couple, so we're kind of in the 4 range, and I've got another couple that is probably almost ready to be a part of that 4 for us. We're kind of spread out. That's one of the issues that we run into as far as being on mission together, because our church, we kind of draw this street out here is 39th Expressway, and we kind of draw people from all along that, from Yukon, which is the next community over, all the way down through Bethany and War Acres. So there's about a 10-mile stretch of road here that we sort of draw people from that area, and so we've struggled with really doing mission well, and I have an idea of what you might say, but I think others might need to hear this too. So what would you suggest for someone like me who's got a group, people who are kind of spread out throughout the region, and the long-term goal is for there to be multiple groups that come out of that?
Yeah.
How do I do a good job of equipping my group well and being on mission together? How would you suggest doing that?
When it's pretty spread.
Yeah, when we're pretty spread out.
Yeah. So if you have questions, I'm going to write those questions down for myself, because I'll get going on some of these things and, get off on a long tangent, good tangent, but tangent. So I'll get that, come back to it. Reflections, things that were affirming for you or convicting for you, or
grief over good intentions. That's just something that was chewing on earlier for me personally, and then there was
say more about that specifically.
Yeah, thanks. I think just for me, I'm an idealist, and so I can tend to wait till things are the ideal situation, which is, everybody knows it's farce to begin with these days, especially you. But also probably the other thing about that, not that specific thing, but the other thing that I was thinking earlier today is I had a bit of a wounding experience when we first moved to plant a church, and I didn't realize until today, I was processing this while you were talking, I didn't realize today how much that affected my recoil to not push in certain areas in some ways, specifically maybe around language that we use for missional intent and seeing opportunities, and how much I had backed off that because of the reaction I got from that. I didn't realize it now, it's late. It's been for a while.
Yeah.
So it just came up today. That's 2.5. That's a 3-year-old wound. So I'm grateful for that.
Thanks for sharing that. It's
Yeah.
good. Jimmy?
This was rather convicting for me. It was your reference to situational providence. It's where I find myself trying to get out of the situation I'm in, rather than say, God, what is going on in this situation that I need to learn from? Who is it that I need to reach out to? That I'm here for a reason. For that, if there are new people, a lot of new people that I need to put in contact with, that God has a reason for that, behind that, and I need to be asking that rather than trying to get out of it.
Very good.
So I was very convicted about that. In fact, I just felt like I just wanted to get up and walk out of the room.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that.
But that was good in the instance of where you were talking about how missional communities that God uses our every aspect of our life. Like if like you have a kid who likes field hockey or soccer or something like that. Well, then God has a reason behind that that's bigger than just your kid playing soccer.
Yeah.
You know, that you need to look into. So, in Missional. So, there you go.
That's great. Yeah. I want to hear some more reflections. 2 comments on that, though. One, yeah, to how you said that at the beginning, we are, as humans and as Christians, for a variety of reasons, so averse to discomfort that we often, that's one of the reasons a lot of churches won't function in this way. Because the traditional way is so much easier. It's so much cleaner. People show up, they look good, they're dressed good, they smell good. They're only there for 90 minutes. They go home.
It's not vulnerable.
Yeah, we're done for the day.
Done. Not for the day, for the week.
Yeah.
You're done for the week until next time. And then they come back and they look good and they smell good and they dress good. And you control the narrative because you're the one preaching. There's no pushback on it. There's no pain. You don't experience any of the pain or doubt or fear or problems that are going on out there in people's lives. And then you go home again. And so it's easy to live that way. It's clean, it's safe, it's comfortable, it's all that. And so I was talking with I was talking yesterday with Jeremy, I told you, down in Norman, about another church that I've interacted with in the region, I'll say it like that. And we had lots of conversations with them about this stuff. They knew convictionally they should do something different than they were doing. And 2 years later, from what I recently heard, they've changed almost nothing. So Jeremy and I were talking about why, what's behind that, and I said, I think it's, you just look, it looks, feels a little too messy to them, a little less controlled than what they're used to, and the cost, or what they think is the cost of what it would take to begin to move towards it, they just feel like it's too high. So they're going to keep in safer, cleaner, more comfortable mode. Because they can. And I there's a lot of churches in the U.S. that are big enough, and I don't know what, there's other variables, but that are big enough and have enough money in the bank or enough money in their property, they can ride out kind of what they're doing, no matter what happens in America. They can ride it out for the next 20 to 30 years. There'll still be people around, they'll still be able to pay the bills, still be able to do what they're doing, and we'll just be able to comfortably, ride it out. So when there's no, when you're in that kind of comfortable place, there's nothing often to, to compel you to change, to compel you to consider, are we doing everything possible to steward what God's called us to? So anyway, that's one point. Another point I was thinking about what you're saying is that something that's so unfortunate, it reminded me of what you said about soccer, is that for so often, church, because it's been so compartmentalized and so program driven, all of the things that most Christians love to do haven't counted. You know what I mean? It's like, man, you like to CrossFit? Imagine stewarding CrossFit for the sake of mission. No, you can't do that. Here's how we do mission. Mission happens here, in this box, in this day, at this time, by these people. CrossFit's not a part of that. Soccer's not a part of that. You know what I mean? And so all these loves, passions, that God has given his people have not been like appreciated or stewarded or empowered when that was the whole point. You know, these things are from him and can be stewarded for him and for mission. So man, if soccer's your thing, let's figure out how to maximize that. If it's CrossFit, let's maximize that. If it's cooking, let's maximize that. If it's, you know, the next thing and the next thing, let's maximize that. So we had, when I was living up in Tacoma, we had a guy and a couple other Christians that were like professional painters, artists, you know, like actually painting expensive pictures of things. Well, think about it historically, like there was no church in Tacoma that like appreciated that. It's like, oh, that's great that you like to do that. Here's how we do church. Here's how we do mission. It's got nothing to do with all your non-Christian painter friends. Your non-Christian painter friends are not going to show up at our church service in most cases. So think of this guy who, that's his life, that's his love, that's his passion, and he's told, you gotta do something else. If you want to be part of this church, if you want to be productive, you gotta do this, you gotta do it in this way. Instead of, we saw that his love, his passion, his skill, his gifting, God-given, and we said his name was Tim. Tim, why don't you build a missional community around that? There's this whole artist community. You've got incredible relationship. You guys love spending hours and hours together talking painting, practicing painting, going to art shows. Like, you've got built-in like mission, like all around. And so a missional community was formed around Tim and a core of people that were artists. But you see the difference? God-given gifting, God-given passion, we've got to empower our people to see that, man, they can use all that good stuff that is God-given for his purposes. That they don't have to, you know, push that to the side and get on board with the very narrow, often, way that a church is choosing to do mission. Does that make sense? So anyway, that came to my mind as you were sharing that, Jimmy. So thanks for bringing that up. Other reflections?
Todd, I want to go back to the...
Hey, Nick, is this thing working? Does it need to be working?
It is working.
Okay, it's red, not blue.
Yeah, it's
I thought it was
red means it's live.
Oh, what's
Yeah.
blue?
Blue means it's not working.
Okay.
Blue means it's on, but
Got
not.
it. Got it.
Sorry, no, but going back to hearing people's stories
Oh yeah.
is actually one of the most powerful things we can have the privilege of doing. And so going back to the guy who loves to paint.
Yeah.
So let's say I love to paint. That's my natural comfort zone anyway. And so I'm going to connect with some guys who are in that same comfort zone, same passion. What if I just take the time to begin to find out some of their stories? And so I would ask the group here, have any of you ever been asked to tell your whole story? And if you haven't, why not? That's disturbing in the church.
Yeah.
If I don't know your story, I don't know you. So if I go to church every week, and I'm one of the most involved people at the church, I can say that. But if I've not heard your story, I don't know you and you don't know me. But when I hear your story, then you realize I do care about you to a certain extent.
Good.
But the stories also will involve, there's an old Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah.
That's what our stories are made up of. And I need to be able, with the Holy Spirit, I need to be able to handle your story. All of it at some point. But just listening to another person's story actually opens the door for that relationship like nothing else.
Good word. Great word. I'm going to say more about that later on, but I do want, so a lot of these guys have heard that because we've talked about it over the past year and a half. Spot on, exactly what you're saying. So as an example, with these DNA groups that I mentioned before, and Scott asked me to talk about more of that later, but the way we start our DNA groups is by basically, from the get-go, every person tells the 30 to 45 minute version of their story. First thing. So you can imagine what kind of culture that creates and what kind of depth that creates from the very beginning if that's how you're starting. And actually, so we do it 2 times. We do it in a, I would say, so I did it with my guys. My wife does it with our gals. So they did the more raw version because it was male specific and female specific. Does that make sense? Certain things you talk about in your story that you can talk about with men when women aren't present. Does that make sense? Certain things women are going to share about their story when men aren't present. And so, but then we also tell like the 30-minute version of each other's stories with the whole gospel community when we begin. And that's not just with the core, that's with the core and the baby Christians. So say Scott's got these 5 couples, these 10 people he's been referring to. We would say in the first couple months of the start of a new missional community, we want all 10 people to share the 30-minute version of their story over the course of the next 4 to 6 weeks. So they're doing it 2 times. They're doing the appropriate larger group, male, female involved version of it. Still a lot of depth to it. And then they're doing it a second time in their DNA, which is filling in a bunch of, it's filling in a bunch of detail, and it's going even deeper into some of the harder parts of their stories. So imagine starting a missional community and starting a DNA connected with that missional community, with that being the starting point. Like when you hear that kind of detail about person's stories, you're pretty quickly ready to go to war with them. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, hear what they've been through, hear what their story is, hear what shaped them, people, experiences. It's like, man, I want to, I want to go on mission with them. I want to go to war with them. I want to live life with them. I want to be family with them. And so, and then when you start that way, it just creates the expectation, to your point of this is how we're going to be all the time. So not only are we going to then push deeper into each other's stories from month to month and week to week, or from week to week and month to month, but that's how we're going to approach non-Christians. So at the park 2 weeks ago on the Sunday, that's what our people were doing with the 4 non-Christian families that were there. Because they understand the power of story, the importance of story. You've got to know people if you're going to love them well. You've got to know people if you're going to serve them well. You've got to know people if you're going to know how to speak truth into the broken, discouraging, fear-producing parts of their lives that everybody has. But if we're not known by each other in that way as a community, we can't do that stuff. We can just throw out generic encouragement or generic, sounds bad, generic truth. You know what I mean now? You get the point? Versus knowing, I know what this person is going through right now because of that part of their story that goes back 10 years. 12 years, 15 years, whatever. My Chinese friend Steven, doctor guy, super smart, there are some interesting things about Chinese culture and Chinese parents. And there's certain parts of his story that I know, parental expectations, high pressure, honor, shame, that go with Chinese culture, actually Japanese culture, maybe even higher level, that affects how Stephen approaches life. Thankfully a lot of it now is informed by the gospel, but he still has a tendency to default to how his dad, parented him. And so when he says certain things, stuff comes up in his marriage, stuff comes up in his parenting, stuff comes up in his job. It often is rooted back in their story. Not something recent, something back. Does that make sense? The sexual stuff, I told you about the guy in my, in our community recently with a choice that is made. It was a bad choice. He admitted it, saw it clearly right away, but as we talked about it, we had to, because we knew that part of his story, when he was a teenager, certain things that were expected of him, it was super skewed, where he was basically expected to have sex as a teenager to prove himself as a man. So, it's rooted in his story all the way back to when he was a teenage boy. So we had to go back into his story as we were encouraging him and praying for him, aware of that in light of the story. Imagine if we wouldn't have known that about his story, though. It's not that we couldn't have spoken some truth to him, you know what I mean? But far more effective, far deeper, far more healing when we can go back to the root sources of people's guilt, shame, fear, pride, anger, when we can go back to the roots of it that really kind of set that in motion in their story. Does that make sense? So yeah, the story piece is big, and so that's why we start our DNAs like that. That's why we start our missional communities like that. And then we not only then start them like that, but then that's just part of the expectation, part of the culture is that we're going to be about people's stories. And sometimes then that's how we will actually use or spend a whole family meal night. I told you we do the family meal nights 2 nights in a month. We do those from 5 to 8 p.m. on Sundays. It's just the time that the core determined was a good time for us and a good window of time. We do that 5 to 8 p.m. I'd say about a third of the time, those meal nights have some form of Bible study, Bible discussion as part of them. But only a third. Okay? So it's not the traditional man. If we don't study the Bible every time we're together, it doesn't count. It's like not a spiritual, that wasn't a spiritual thing. So 2/3 of the time, we do other things. And a lot of that could be, so I told you about Kate, who had the husband who had the second affair. That just happened a few months ago. They just got divorced a few weeks ago. When Kate told us about the second affair and that happening, what do you think a good family would do that evening? They would what?
Have her over.
Okay. Yeah, she was already going to come. She was already going to come be part of our family meal night that Sunday. But then, what do you think we're going to focus on that night?
Address the topic.
Exactly.
Issue.
Good family to Kate. So the night was completely about Kate and her current story and her backstory. Because the current story, the divorce, separation, the affairs, her non-Christian husband, is all rooted, obviously, in her backstory. But the best way, the most loving thing we could do that night was for the night to be all about Kate. Whatever agenda we might have had going into it, doesn't matter. At that point, it's like off the table. Tonight's about Kate. Encouraging Kate, speaking truth to Kate, praying for Kate. It's about Kate. Because that's what good family does, especially in moments like these. Does that make sense?
You do with a bunch of kids that are wild and woolly.
Sounds like that.
He said, what do you do with a bunch of kids if the kids are around? So our kids are in another part of the house so we do the first 90 minutes, we just do food together. We enjoy the meal, we enjoy the food, we enjoy being together. Everybody's interacting with each other's kids. So I love it because my kids have grown to love these adults. And part of it is because they spend so much time with these other adults around the table and at meals. So we're really almost like co-parenting we're almost co-parenting each other's kids in a way. Does that make sense? So the first 90 minutes, just food, catching up with people. And then the second 90 minutes, the kids are in another part of the house or outside and are being cared for by two people from the community who are rotating responsibility. So even if you don't have kids, if you're single, young married, you're helping with kids. Partially because that's what it means to be a good family, partially because that's how you're going to learn to parent your own kids someday, is by caring for our kids now. So some of the best training for your singles and young marrieds without kids is to have them, again, they're not on every week. We're sharing responsibilities. Your family does. So we're rotating kid responsibility. Does that make sense? But then the adults then that are in the other space, again, a third of the time it's Bible study, 2/3 of the time it's stories, it's some other discussion, something that came up in somebody's life, at work, in their marriage, in their sex. We're talking about it, and we're speaking gospel truth into those things. And you can do that, you can adjust it appropriately even with non-Christians present. A lot of times we'll have non-Christians show up to the family meal nights, okay? This isn't an exclusive Christian-only thing. We'll have non-Christians show up, and so depending on how well we know them, we will adjust the night appropriately. So, as an example, if one of these non-Christians came, like Michelle, who I've told you about a few times, single mom, if she came, she'd have no problem, like anything. She's going to be able to roll with anything we talk about, and we're going to be able to ask her anything we want to ask her, basically, because she's been around us. She trusts us. Does that make sense? She's not a Christ follower. That's okay. She knows we love her. She loves us. She trusts us. We can ask her anything. We can talk about it. But you may have somebody who's not in that category yet, new non-Christian acquaintance, friend, and they show up. So we had this not too long ago with another single mom, and she was coming for the first time, and it's like, okay, so how do we love her well? It's her first time here. It's probably one of the first times, if not the first time, she's ever been with a group of Christians in an environment like this. So she's a little bit, we're just thinking, she's probably a little skittish. She's wondering if this is a cult or what this is, because, like, who does this? Like, what is this? Who does this? And so, who knows what's going on in her head? So I'm like, okay, what's going to be best for Christine tonight? And so we had two of the couples in our community at the time. One of them part of the core, one of them not part of the core, so in the baby category. The ones in the baby category just got married. And so I asked them, like, man, how are you guys doing? How's the new marriage thing going? What are you guys learning? And because they had been part of our community for a while, because we had done the story thing, what do you think came out of their mouths?
It's a very personal conversation.
Exactly. They were very open, very honest, very vulnerable. Man, been married 3 months. They got married in their early 30s, so a little bit late. Very vulnerable, saying, man, marriage is awesome, and we're super selfish. Okay? We had all these things that we were our preferences during our 20s, that we got, these habits we got into. Now we just got married, and man, am I selfish. They both said it. You know? But, so cool, again, these are in the baby Christian category. But what came out of their mouth next was, but we're learning to serve each other. I didn't say, like, that came out of their mouth. I didn't set them up. I didn't prep them. Like, that was just how God's, what they'd experienced before in terms of story and that, but saying, but God's teaching us to serve each other and extend grace. So that came out of their mouths. So what do you think's going on in Christine's mind at this point? Blowing her mind. Imagine, non-Christian, never been around, again, very broken backstory, broken family, broken marriage. Aliens. Who are these people? They're talking about marriage and loving and extending grace, and I thought when you got in a conflict you just fought it out till, you know, somebody was more bloody than the other one. Then you go to bed. You know what I mean? I mean, seriously, think about it. Your average non-Christian, that's their understanding, experience. So this is blowing Christine's mind. So this is just, again, normal meal night, normal. So then I asked the other couple who had just had their first baby, a couple months into it, like, man, how you guys doing? First time parents, how's it going for you? What do you think came out of their mouth? Honest, raw, vulnerable, man, beautiful baby, love the baby, man. At 2 in the morning, we're struggling. 2 in the morning, we are so selfish. We're elbowing each other. Who's going to get up with the baby? We're getting angry at each other. We're getting angry at the baby. Who gets angry at a 2-month-old baby? Who gets angry? Exact, yeah, tired. Everybody. Who doesn't do that, I should say. Somebody who's superhuman. But anyway, so this stuff's coming out of their mouths, and then, but you know what? God is teaching us to serve each other, serve the baby, be gracious at 2 a.m. in the morning. It was just like, I didn't set them up, I didn't prep them in any way. That was just because they're part of this grace-filled, story-filled culture of this community. What do you think's going on in Christine's mind now? Even crazier. Who talks like this? Who, like... This is her first night. So, Christine was just at our house a few days ago with her little 3-year-old having a play date. The growth in her life in the past 6 months, 8 months since we met her, off the charts. Off the charts. And we haven't done anything of that special than have her regularly be part of this healthy community that talks about life in this way, talks about Jesus a lot, is generous with their time and money. Christine was the one who I told you about the bed and the sheets and the pillow, so she's the one that we helped with that. So we knew her 4 months at that point. She's like, who does that? You know, probably cost us $200. We didn't tell her, we didn't expect anything, but she knew, you know, nice bed, nice mattress, nice sheets. She knew it cost some money. Like, who does that? 4 months into a relationship with a single mom. So, but that kind of stuff can happen. That's the church, guys. That's the church. The people doing those things, buying the sheets, having those conversations, they're very normal people. They didn't go to Bible school or seminary. They haven't been through any 2-year training program. They're just normal Christians that love Jesus and are increasingly learning to love people. To love people with their time, to love people with their money, to love people with their heart and their conversation that flows from their heart. That's all it is. So we've got the potential, like we've got an army of potential those. Like these people that I'm describing who are having those conversations, like they're normal, they're as normal can be. So we've got an army of those available, potentially. The church here in Oklahoma, in the U.S. We've got an army, but they're not mobilized. They're sitting on their hands. And the only expectation for most of them is to show up at church service. When they could be doing what they love to do, doing the things God's given them gifts to do, loving the people God's put them in places already where they live and work and play. God's already put them there. That's what we gotta be about, guys. Regularly casting that vision for our people. This is who you are as the people of God. There's not a unique category of Christian. Everybody's a missionary. We're all called to be family. All of us. Young and old. 6-month-old Christians, 6-year-old Christians. Everybody. This is the vision God has for His people. The vision He has for His church. We got to take it seriously. Organize to help facilitate that. It's a good way to say it. That releases people's potential. Their potential to love, their potential to influence. So it's interesting, in where is it? Matthew, or a couple places where we're called to pray for more workers. We've got plenty of workers around us. The problem is more our problem as the church in its current form than actually a lack of potential workers. Does that make sense? There's supposedly tens of millions of Christians in the United States. That's a lot of workers, potential workers. How many of them, though, are equipped, empowered, organized to live in the ways we're talking about? Fraction. A fraction. When it's supposed to be the norm, the expectation. Here in Oklahoma, wow, so many potential workers, disciplers, missionaries, so many. But not when their expectation is just show up at the building and then go back and get on with the American dream. Is there an Oklahoma dream?
Yeah.
The Oklahoma version. So anyway, that hopefully that helps explain, like when we say family meal night or something like that, like don't lock yourself into, again, traditional mindset, traditional Bible study. We study something formally, technically, and then everybody goes home. It's like, oh, it was great to have some more information about Galatians. But say, no, we ought to go home every night being better equipped, whenever we're together, going home better equipped to love our co-workers, our neighbors tomorrow. If it doesn't result in that, what are we doing? Why are we, the Bible makes it very clear, called to be doers of the word. We spend a huge amount of time focused on being knowers of the Word. I don't see that in Scripture. Yes, we're supposed to meditate on the Word, and yes, but again, the result is supposed to be the outworking in our lives. Going to work has transformed people. Going to school has transformed people. Walking the dog has transformed people. Getting coffee has transformed people. Soccer practice has transformed people. Mom's group has transformed people. If we're not doing that, what are we spending our time doing? So, that was a long tangent, but a good one. Important one. So, any other, well, keep going. Reflecting, what are you feeling? I want to make sure everything you're thinking, feeling, wondering about is getting out on the table.
I know as I've pressed into this idea of living on mission to missional communities, gospel communities, I used to have proud myself to be a very relational person, but I didn't realize how much I was hiding in like programming relationships, or facilitating a facade of relationships that were still keeping people at arm's distance in ministry, and God's really been pulling that into the light recently, and it's because this missional community idea doesn't really facilitate program relationships that could either get close or get called out kind of thing. That's what's been happening. So I've just been reflecting on that as you lean more heavily on the relational side and away from the pragmatism or programming side of church. It's just reflection.
Good. And don't hear that so hopefully you're not hearing all. So primarily God's called us to relationship, deep relationship with each other's family, and then extending it to the lost. Okay, that's primary. That doesn't mean you can't do some programs
Sure.
or events sprinkled in there. One of our missional communities on the south end of Tacoma, when I was living there, would do regular these big backyard concerts because they were musicians, and they had a ton of lost musician friends that they wanted to influence. Well, that's a program. It's an event, right? It's not something they're doing as the main thing, but it's something they would sprinkle into what they're doing as one more step, hopefully, in the lives of a lot of those non-Christians. Does that make sense? So they're doing a lot of other meals and parties and at the park with those friends, but sometimes they would do the big backyard concert, and it was a good thing. For a lot of those non-Christians, it was like, wow, look at this. There's 100 people here, good music, good food, kids are having a blast. Like who does this? We don't, nobody else is organizing this around our city. You know what I mean? So it was very compelling because this missional community that was the main organizer of this would ask 3 or 4 of our other missional communities to help them love those non-Christian neighbors and musician friends. So it was the primary work of one missional community that had a bunch of musicians in it, but they would ask 3 or 4 others to join them because there was a lot of non-Christians showing up. Does that make sense? And so that's an example of a program or an event that was used strategically but connected to the regular rhythm of their missional community. Make sense? So don't hear no events ever, no programs ever, just not the primary thing, and don't spend a huge amount of your time or energy or money in that, because again, that's not going to give us the depth of relationship that is going to change people's lives. A lot of times those things are just a door into, first steps into relationship with people. that then the missionary communities need to take deeper through the regular stuff I've been talking about, regular examples. Michael, did you have a question or thought?
I'm not. I keep fixing my head.
Okay, great, Jimmy.
I do. Along the same lines that Blake was talking about, you're talking about a different criteria for success.
Yeah.
We're very success oriented. We want to know that we're accomplishing what we're setting out to do. So here, this is a whole different set of
Metrics.
that we're talking about here.
Yep.
So it might be helpful. I'm just wondering what, we have to not only, I think, come to a conclusion within ourselves what success looks like for us in ministry, but we need to be able to communicate that to our core and everyone else. Otherwise, we'll do that mission drift and we'll go back to the old criteria of more people than we had last week. That's success. More money collected than we had last month. That's success. You know what I mean? So it's just a new metric, a new scorecard. I call it a scorecard, but we have a different scorecard than we had before. And that has to be communicated and reinforced, because I don't know, the world I live in, there's a whole different scorecard going on than what we're talking about right now.
Oh yeah.
And they'll look at this and they'll say, well, that's not going to lead you to success. So
Yep.
I'm thinking that's a huge issue, because we have to really, it has to be something that's got to be rock solid core in us. That this is what success looks like in my ministry.
So let's do that together. What are they? What should they be? What are the new metrics based on everything we've said? Based on, again, what would you say were Jesus' metrics?
Are we loving people well?
You had 3.5 years. This group of guys,
Yeah.
we left behind. Like, based on that, this conversation, let's try for 5. Let's try for 5 new metrics.
Life change.
Sorry, Darren.
I just said, are we loving people well?
Okay. How are you gonna measure? How are you gonna measure? That's good.
It's good though. It's good.
How are you gonna measure it?
He's right spot on.
Well,
There's ways to measure it. So.
yeah, I think we look at what we talked about earlier. Do we love them enough to hear their story, to share our story? So are those conversations happening? Scott told me at lunch about the 4 B's, the old metrics we use, though. And we're talking about, it's a lot cleaner. Those 4 B's are easy to measure.
Unfortunately, they're easy to measure. So I'm gonna say number of deep stories. That's a good one. I like it. Number of deep stories we're having with lost people. And I want to connect one other one and keep it in our number 1 here, but I think kind of connected with that. I'm going to say number that consider us I like that one. Number that consider us friends. It doesn't matter what we think about lost people. What matters is what they think about us. We can say, oh yeah, I've got 5 lost friends. You sure? Do they consider you a friend? Do they trust you? Are they going to come to you with big questions? Are they going to come to you when they're in pain? Are they going to come to you when their marriage is struggling? If they're not coming to you, probably not. We're not in the trusted friend category. We might be in the acquaintance friend, but we're not in the trusted friend category. So wow, what a great metric. Is there an increasing number of people in our neighborhood, in our part of town, is there an increasing number that consider us trusted friends? And again, I put it together with this one because how's that going to happen? That isn't going to happen without the first part. You don't become trusted friends unless you know a deep chunk of their story and they know a deep chunk of your story. Story doesn't go one direction. Story never goes one direction, or shouldn't. If you're willing to open up your life and your story to me, the proper response, respectful response, loving response is for me to also similarly share my story with you. So when that happens, that's how we get to there, to become trusted friends with people. We don't do this if we just hang out a lot, hour after hour, party after party with people. They just think we're fun. We're not trusted friends. We're just fun acquaintances. Does that make sense? You could be with non-Christian 20 times this year. Party, park, CrossFit, beer, coffee, do it all. End of the year, you're man, I like being around you. If I've got a big life issue though, I'm still not coming to you. Because you don't really know me and I don't really know you. We've just hung out a lot, played a lot. So, somebody else had, Nick?
Not so much a question, but kind of a comment on that, because I've observed in a lot of conversations I've had, specifically around here, there's a lot of church culture, I call it the religious spirit. There's a lot of religious spirit in this community and just in Oklahoma City in general. I've had multiple people I've had conversations with that had some breakthroughs because when I'm talking to them, they don't feel like they're my project. And so something the Lord's been speaking to me about is you mentioned this earlier, people matter. Everyone is made in the image of God, whether they fully understand that and embrace it or not. It's just a reality. It's true, and it's what we believe as Christians. But you said it earlier, people, does it matter if they don't make a decision? And I think so oftentimes that we've been, we've programmed things to be like the only thing that matters is people who make decisions, and a lot of people just feel like the church doesn't care about them. And that it's like a bait and switch. Well, I can come and do your thing, but you don't care about my life. And this totally flips the script. When we care about people just because they're made in the image of God, whether or not they come our way and make a decision or whatever, we just care about them because they're important. It totally changes the conversation. I've got a lady that she comes to this coffee shop almost every single day, and she's not a believer, but she knows she's cared about at this place, and I'll sit down and have a conversation with her. I'm finding what you're talking about here to be absolutely critical if we want to legitimately reach a culture that is far from God. And because the reality is we're in Babylon, we're not in Israel anymore. We're in a culture that is foreign to us as believers.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. Spot on. So yeah, we talked about that some earlier about, again, God's timing, God's sovereignty in people coming to faith. Sometimes never, or at least sometimes not, that we're aware of. So, seems like the goal for Jesus, or the metric, was at least partially like this was a big deal. Again, where he wasn't counting conversions per se, because at this point, when he was called a friend of sinners, were there many of them probably following at that point? Conversion fruit wasn't all that exciting, right? At that point. And yet, they're traveling around all these places and they're becoming known as the friends of sinners, the gluttons and the drunkards, right? So it's very interesting to your point, Nick, to say, this is a very important metric. Again, are our churches increasingly becoming known in that way in our communities? And that church inside out, man, those guys sure seems like they're, friends with an awful lot of sinners. Loving them well, serving them well. What other metrics, what other things might be better to measure or better to have guiding us than what are the 3 B's, butts, budgets, and buildings?
Well,
Is that the right order? Maybe
as-
buildings.
as you get to know people, you realize they've got struggles and challenges, and so part of the success I would see is when you pour into someone, share your life with them, and they still have struggles and challenges as we all do, but they're no longer controlled by those things anymore.
Good.
They're battled by them.
Good.
That's a crossing over that line for them.
Good. I don't know how we'd name that. I don't know why it came to me in this way, but I just, as I heard you say that, one of the things I heard, this might not be fully what you're thinking, but parts of their lives are being healed. They're becoming more whole. Does that make sense? So Michelle, the atheist, agnostic, single mom, because of our community, she's in just a healthier life place. You know what I mean? She's got less anxiety seems like less anxiety, less fear, more hope, more purpose than she had 6 months ago before she got more closely connected with our community. So again, so often if it's not conversion, it doesn't count. Yes, conversion's very important. We're not gonna throw that out. But we haven't failed if it's not that. This is wild success in Michelle's life. Wild success. Christine, told you about, the other single mom. We're not sure she's a Christian yet. Is she close? We're not sure, we can't determine that anyway, where she's at, if she's in or out. But man, she is so much healthier as a human than she was 9 months ago. So much healthier as a mom. You can see she used to show up at our house, there'd be all kinds of anxiety. She was stressed out because her little 2-year-old at the point was wreaking havoc around our house, and she was just a stressed individual. She was at our house the other day. Very calm woman, very peaceful, smile on her face most of the time. Her son's doing some of the same stuff. But actually, she's parenting him better. She had no boundaries before. She didn't know how to discipline him before. She didn't know how to talk to him before. That's changing because she's watching our moms talk to their children, teach their children, discipline their children. She's a very different individual 9 months later. I don't know if she's a Christian yet, but wow, has there been healing in her life. Her divorce from the jerky husband, that used to be a big, dominating thought in her mind and her story. Not so much anymore. Moved on from it. Sees him differently now. Broken man. Doesn't know Jesus. Makes sense that he was a jerk to her. Because that's what happens when you're dominated by self. So anyway, does that make sense? Wow, what a different metric.
Can I tag on to that for a second?
Yeah.
I'm just saying a story. you know, because you're talking about conversion and how that's not, we don't want to discount conversion. But also because we put so much weight on conversion, sometimes I think we overlook the fact that God works indirectly from us sometimes. And so there's a lady that, mostly grown kids, she sat in our living room one day and just wept over what she saw as failure of raising her kids, because her oldest was an obstinate, defiant atheist. That was 2 years ago, and he came home from work 3 days ago and told his mom that he trusted Jesus as Savior. So there was life healing happening in his mom, and not necessarily directly because of that, but because of people who have been praying for him for 2 years, people engaged him, and indirect to his mom and us, other people that we didn't know about that started to engage him. And so conversion did happen, but it also happened through patience, perseverance, healing under the hand of God in healthy believers. So it's not a dismissal of conversion, it's just that wasn't all about pass fail 2 years ago.
Yeah.
God had it in the right time.
Good. Thanks for that.
And how do you go about presenting this in a manner where people don't get discouraged by the fact that it might be a year down the road before they see the fruit that they perceive as the end result?
You just have to you have to set that out as the norm. You know, again, as part of that rechurching we talked about, even talking about new metrics, new expectations, like people moving from, especially places of significant brokenness, to healing and to conversion and to those places, takes time.
Yeah.
So,
We're talking about a different thing of success. I'm just wondering if, I'm one of these people that if we, my wife and I get in the car and our goal is to get to Atlanta, then I'm just going to Atlanta. But she's like, oh, let's stop and look at this, and let's stop and look at this. And so hers is the journey, and I'm wondering if maybe our goal is the journey here, not to see somebody necessarily, because that'll take care of itself. If you're on the right path and and we're processing the journey, then we'll get to the end. So I'm just thinking, like life healing, let's just helping someone is more the goal, but it's also the process,
Good.
And where that goes, that's in God's hands anyway. I mean, these outcomes that we're talking about, really, they're all God's outcomes. They're not ours.
Yep. Good. Well, a bunch of things just popped into my mind that I got to get off. I've never thought about this in this way, so I'm jazzed right now too. Okay. What if? Okay. I like the first two for metrics. What if another metric would be, again, an increasing number of people that have, we had a long conversation about core maturity, core readiness, core responsibility. What if that was a metric? How could it not actually, now that we've talked about it, how could it not,
It has to be.
It has to be a metric.
Yeah.
We've got to say, last year we had 6 people that were core mature, and this year we have 10. Awesome. Or 12, we doubled. We doubled the number of people who were core ready, core responsible, core mature. What a cool metric.
Yeah.
And what an important metric, because again, going back to what we said, without that you don't get healthy missional communities. Without that you don't get multiplication. Right? So it's got to be a metric. So, first time I've ever thought about it in that way.
That's good.
Another one, number 4, what if a metric, and it seems like, again, with how we've been talking about this, what if a solid metric was the number of people that are experiencing the gospel in a regular DNA type relationship? And again, so much of the fruit of it is going to be up to God. But are we creating, I think as though it's a tangible metric just to say, man, this year we saw 6 more, 8 more, 10 more people get into regular DNA relationships. Which I believe, again, if you do it regularly and if you do it with some intentionality, it is going to result with what I put up there, where people's minds are increasing. People are increasingly growing with a gospel mind.
Gospel mind, that's good. That is so good.
Approaching work with gospel, approaching marriage, parenting, money, sex, their time,
Root to root, all that stuff.
with a gospel mind. What a great measurement. What a great measurement. And then based on our number 5, again, new thought for me, what if a metric would be, again, that there's an increasing number of people, increasing number of missional communities, whether that's, we had 1 last year, we got 2 this year. Beautiful. Where we've got an increasing number of people, an increasing number of groups that have a clear mission focus to their lives. They approach their week, they approach their month, they approach their calendar with a desire and an appetite and an intentionality.
Missional part.
Whoa, think about that, because you know how many Christians don't have that. And so you think about using that as a measurement to say, man, we've got 10 more people that really have a mission focus to their lives. And you can see it in their calendar. You can see it in who they're spending their time with. They're actually not just going to the park now, they're going to the park with those 2 neighbors. They're not just crossfitting now, they're actually crossfitting. They're not just playing soccer now, they're actually playing soccer with with a focus towards soccer resulting in more relationship beyond soccer, beyond CrossFit. Does that make sense? I think that could be such a cool measurement. And similarly, I don't know, I added as another one, but I want to get to this before we run out of time. I don't know what time we're going to wrap up, but this 30-day plan, I'm actually going to put it up here as number 6.
On our schedule, we had 4 o'clock is a break time, or in time for the afternoon. And it
Okay.
begins at 6.
30 minutes from now.
Yeah.
Okay. So does this make sense? It's kind of like the next step, which we always talk about anyway. Once you get clarity about mission, you've got to form it into a plan, specific plan. We talked about it quite a bit this morning. But it could be a very helpful metric. I was talking with Jeremy about this actually down in Norman yesterday, because these are things that have talked about, but he admittedly has not tracked them very closely. And so my encouragement to him was to say, I think you need to follow up with each of your missional communities regularly and actually check in and see how they're progressing with their contextualized, customized version of their life together as a family on mission. Does that make sense? But it can be a metric because if they have not progressed to that point, then I would say it demonstrates a certain level of immaturity. Where they've got good intentions, but the good intentions have not moved to action. Does that make sense? I think it's fair to say that there's a big step of maturity there to be able to move from good intentions for mission to actually plan for mission. That's a mature step. So therefore, it's a clear metric or measurement. Does that make sense? So we agreeing with that? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Take whichever of those are helpful, but yeah, I really like considering these as a very different set of metrics of what is health, what is growth, what is maturing, what is progress in these things. So look at the 30-day plan. I've already talked about, so turn it over, backside of the cover page. This is, this again is a customized plan, unique to La Mesa, California, unique to the 4 core couples leading that, unique to our circumstances. Okay? So what I always tell the churches I work with, I was on a call recently with a church in Stockholm, Sweden. They've got a very different set of variables. But I said, you need to come up with the Stockholm version of this. Something's possible that is appropriate and sustainable for Stockholm. I was on a call with a bunch of Russian leaders recently. Said the same thing. You need to come up with the Moscow version of this, the Volgograd version of this, the contextualized version of this. Does that make sense? So the principles guiding it, I think, are universal. And some of the ways we have organized it are just helpful to consider. Yeah, we could do a version or a variation of that that's going to be better suited to our situation. Again, maybe the frequency of certain things, or maybe again the times. Maybe Sunday evenings aren't a good time in in this area. Okay, maybe it's Friday nights, or maybe it's who knows when. But the point is, your missional community needs to have an aspect of planned life together, and then a posture of this spontaneous or organic life together. Is that making sense? If all of the life your missional communities live together is just the planned part, it's not bad. It's just going to be limited, because the number of touches is going to be more limited. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you've got the plan part, which you have to, again, customize. And you've got the organic part, which you put out there in some form of what I have there, and say, here's the Bethany version of that. Here's the Norman version of that, the Lawton version of that. Each of you named like 5 different places where you're trying to start communities, Darren. Customize.
So a lot of football variables this time.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So I mean that could be leveraged. So.
Yep. Yep. But you got to customize. You can't cookie cutter it, because each of those places is different, and the people at the center of them are different, and the people they're on mission to are different. So you've got to help them customize. Again, principles and examples will be helpful for them to get the right, categories, but then to say, yeah, we could do a variation of that that's going to be appropriate to where God has placed us.
So you're saying a beach night in Weatherford probably wouldn't work very well?
No. Maybe there's a river nearby and it has a sliver.
Crawdad hunt.
So maybe beach night for you is late night.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's deer hunting.
There you go.
And where I grew up, deer hunting, big deal. So, but the important thing is here, and why I want to emphasize it, is your missional community. You got to help each of them create some form of this. If they don't, they'll just have all these ideas and good intentions, and it'll never happen very well, because there's no plan. Again, they'll get distracted, they'll get busy with other stuff, and then you're wondering like, wow, weren't we talking about that 6 months ago? It never happened. Mm-hmm. That thing we wanted to do 3 months ago never happened. And you wonder why, and it's because we didn't prioritize it in our schedule. This happens with my wife and I. Man, yeah, I gotta be careful about what I talk about here. You probably know what I'm thinking.
Rule teller.
There's certain things, like even with date nights, priority for us. Okay? If we don't put it on the calendar, though, guess what happens?
Doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Gets filled up with kid stuff, gospel community stuff, neighbor stuff. And it's like, oh man, we haven't had date night in 2 months. Oh, we didn't do the simple step of literally, this is what it takes, of writing it on paper. We needed to take the 30 seconds and actually use a pen and scribble it on the calendar. And then it happens. Because it's on there, and we block it out, and we don't let something replace date night. So something as important as a date night for a married couple, if that can be pushed out, you can imagine for the people in your church, if you don't get stuff like locked in on paper on the calendar, gone. All those good ideas, all those good intentions, whoosh, gone. Doesn't matter how much you talk about it. Again, I can't tell you how many conversations we've had about date nights. When we write it down, it happens. When we fail to write it down, often doesn't happen. So, interesting how that works. So as you look at this, what do you think? What can you imagine quickly, like some appropriate variations of this for your context? So you can't do the beach nights, but you can do game nights. You can't do movie nights in your driveway, probably, none of this. But just variations of it. Can have OU game days, game day parties, unless you hate OU.
There are no communists in this room.
Okay. And yeah, you know, kids in the front yard with sprinkler, like all kinds of.
Food. People always comment when there's food.
Yeah.
You know, if I put my barbecue in my front yard and I start grilling burgers and I tell the neighbors they're welcome, I've never had people not show up.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the third of next month, we have it blasted that we're grilling on our front yard, so everybody bring their grills and food, and we're
Great.
getting right next to the neighborhood, so.
Great.
That's the most human and
Yeah.
thing you've ever said, brother.
Food is, yeah. So we did the thing I told you last Halloween. I don't know what you guys think about Halloween. I'm not a big Halloween fan. My wife actually hates it. But because it's such a good missional opportunity,
Well, yeah, everybody's out.
she's willing to overcome her disdain for Halloween. But man, two things. We did in our driveway, so our kids went out trick-or-treating, and for some reason our neighborhood's become like one of the cool trick-or-treating spots. So there were hundreds of trick-or-treaters in our neighborhood last Halloween. It was nuts. But we put a fire pit, just a portable fire pit at the end of our driveway, had hot chocolate, and one of the guys in our gospel community is a musician, and so he set up a little kids dance area with lights and fun kids songs. So man, you got all these. We had neighbors coming over. Michelle drove down 30 minutes to trick or treat with us and be part of that whole thing. Like, man, we met so many people that night. It was so easy. A little fire pit, a little hot chocolate, the music. And it was cool. We had a lot of non-Christian neighbors, not just come by and say hi, but actually come in, bring their kids, dance around a little bit, get a little hot chocolate, hang out for a half hour. Just one more piece. Just one more piece in those relational journeys with a lot of those people. So Anyway, do please take that seriously. Honestly, like, this is universally true. Leaders I work with around North America, even in other parts of the world, it is the lack of this which is the primary reason for their lack of fruitfulness. Great people, great intentions, no plan.
This last month for me specifically over at Wyckoff Church, we have a version of this that we put out every month, and we send out. We customize it each month. It's always different, you know. There's like what you have here where it says priorities for planning, gospel, family, mission. We have our three, which I should be able to quote, but I can't right now. But anyway, we have our three that we focus and we plan. I didn't do it this last month. Just been super busy, and guess what? Every time we had a gathering, everybody was like, "Oh, I forgot," or "Oh, what is it?" And people wouldn't show up, and I'm just like, anyway. So had a realization, and I've only done it once, and you'll never mess up on that again. This is really important. And so it gives people a sense of ownership too.
Yeah.
When you do it together.
Good.
With your thing. Since I'm already talking, I just want to go ahead and say this out loud. Not to be redundant, but it's really important to take these different aspects of these measurements of success. Coming in today, I was actually struggling really hard with this. We're small, you know, we're just beginning, so I only have a couple families involved with us, and these couple families that are involved with us are all about to leave. Everybody's about to move away. And so it's almost like we're starting from zero again. And so it's a temptation for my wife and I, Laura, to kind of feel like we failed. We know we haven't. But based upon the success or based upon the measurements of success, such as conversion rate or getting people in the door and locking it behind them, keep them there, you know, that type of thing, you know, we have failed on that success. But based upon what we reflect back on the last 6 months with these families that we've been involved with that are about to bounce, their lives have drastically changed from their stories and their life healing and maturity, and so it's a beautiful thing. So this was a sense of healing, just being refreshed by this. So just sharing that with everybody. So.
And that's something we have to deal with in Lawton, Fort Sill, military community, families coming and going every 3-4 years.
Yeah.
You know, the huge churches see a lot of turnaround, stuff like that, so that's another issue for churches, you know, that go by the standard metrics is, you know, how are we gonna keep our numbers up with all these families at PCS in and out? You know, we got these new families in, how do we get them in the doors when we have all these other families leaving? So I feel what you're talking about there.
Makes you feel like you're failing when they leave.
Exactly.
And maybe that should be another metric of the people that you've trained up and you've sent them out to other towns.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because because we've all inherited people that you have raised up, and we're very thankful.
Yeah.
We just hate to lose them.
Yeah. That's real work. That's good. Yeah. And a measurement a false sense of success is, oh, I haven't really sent them out unless they're going to go plant a church that we're funding, and I haven't really sent them out. But that's not the truth either. You know, sending them out and never hearing from them again.
Right.
Yeah, we don't necessarily get to see them. We just know what's happening.
Yeah, we've sent hundreds to Life Church. There's, it just didn't want to.
There's the military reality. There's the student university reality too. I heard the same thing yesterday with the guys in Norman. You know, they've got these students year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe if they're lucky 4 years. What you can imagine even filtering student college ministry through this, and to say if we get them for just 2 years, military or university, either. What if they have this kind of experience for just 2 years? You think they're not going to go to their next place and most likely think differently, live differently, relate differently?
Well, you've ruined them. They can't go to a normal church.
Well, exactly. I was going to say, look.
I just said normal.
Look for a different church differently. That's what was going to come out of my mouth next. Exactly. But what a cool thing to say. Man, we get a year or 2, maybe 3 with them. They're going to be different based on these things wherever God places them next. So I wanted to come back to both, I think Scott and Nick's questions were similar. Kind of already commented on some of this, but do it again. So you've got a community, 3 couples, 4 couples, 5 couples. They've got relationships kind of scattered around the area. You said that, right?
Yeah.
And you said some form of that to me. They've got a spread of non-Christian relationships. What do we do with that? Well, again, that was that 40 to 60. That was that 40 to 60 potentially scattered around the city there. So what you have to do as a missional community is saying again, where does it seem like is the good soil from that pool of relationships? Doesn't matter whose neighborhood or who started the relationship. I'm committing to help you love your neighbors. Our community, because we need the 5.3, happening. So I'm going to help you love that coworker, and you're going to help us love this neighbor next door. And we are going to help that family love that family from their kids' soccer. Does that make sense? So it's not location specific. They're kind of from the neighborhood or from your area, but it's less important like what their physical address is, and you just determining, how do we know them? Do we believe God's called us to pursue them? Do they seem like good soil? And are we committed to loving them together? If we are, let's go for it. Does that make sense? And then the more you do that, it will grow over time. You're able to multiply over time. And then you will start to get certain concentrations of people in certain neighborhoods or certain parts of the city. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful.
One of the churches I work with is in Bucharest, Romania. So big city, 4 million people, massive. When they first started this way, like 10, 12 years ago, they had a small, healthy core, probably about 20 people, but in a city of 4 million, that's a drop. And they were pretty scattered. So one of the cool things actually, because they felt called to live life this way, actually when they were making their next move, a lot of them lived in apartments, so they'd get bumped out of their apartments or they needed to get into a bigger place. Guess how they made those decisions? They made the decision about where they were getting their next apartment strategically, saying, we're going to move closer together. So we have a little concentration here now. We had that spread before, now we got a little concentration here. And then a couple other people moved over here. And they had better concentration there. Does that make sense? Now 10 years on, when you look at what they have, even in this huge city, they've got more people living in closer proximity, so they're able to have greater cooperation and greater proximity for greater influence. Didn't start that way ideally, It was far from ideal in the beginning. It was kind of scattered, all over. But then they started praying differently. Man, we need a concentration of people in the northeast part of the city. Well, let's pray for it. And let's encourage some people to consider moving there at some point. Who knows when? Because we believe God wants us to have something happening, planting a missional community in the northeast part of the city. You do that over time. You're faithful, you're praying, people are making different housing choices. You're getting to know new people because you're praying in certain strategic places. And it strengthens. And now they've got, again, these concentrations of people in different pockets of the city, so they're having even more influence. Does that make sense?
Todd, when you're talking about this, the 40 to 60, you're talking Bucharest, you're talking 4 million people. The the options are seemingly endless.
Yep.
So there's something behind the scenes in these decision-making processes. I'm assuming what you would say in terms of trusting the Lord, hearing from the Spirit. Will you speak about that in terms of communities considering who they go after and what it's like to seek the Lord for those kind of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit rhetorical. I mean, you said it well.
Okay.
It's necessary for us to be very prayerful. Obviously, this is supernatural work we're talking about. It's not just connect all the dots and line things up and have the right metrics and put the right systems and structures in place. God's way more creative than we are. We've got to do the best we can with the structural, organizational, strategic ability that we have. But man, being prayerful, discerning, and saying, we thought we were supposed to start here in the Northwest. Look at this thing that's opened up in the Southeast. Huh. How are we going to respond to that now? Does that make sense? So prayerful, discerning, regularly asking, are we on the right track? Somewhere we're supposed to go next. Somewhere we're supposed to send a couple couples, you know. One of the cool things I've seen with churches when they really start to get this is when families start to make big housing decisions because of it. We had a couple, this couple was in their early 60s. This guy worked for Boeing, made a lot of money, was set, was a year from retirement. He lived on this piece of property that looked up at Mount Rainier. Like, you seen Rainier when it's clear? It's like otherworldly. That was his backyard. Dream home, dream property, a year from retirement, and was gripped by this vision. And he and his wife sold it, moved into Tacoma, became part of a missional community that was on mission to one of the roughest high schools where 80% of the boys in the school didn't have dads. Wow. Could have just rode off into the sunset, dream home, sitting out in the backyard, sipping whatever, looking up at Mount Rainier every clear day, which is only a few days a year, but you know what I mean? Could have rode that baby out, was in his early 60s, plenty of money in the bank, but it's like, no, God's called us to more than this. He hasn't called us to write it out. He's called us to pour it out. He's called us to pour it out to the end, not write it out. And so, sells the dream house, moves in. I've seen a lot of that happen. I've seen a lot of it happen. In America, in other parts of the world. Beautiful. Beautiful when people start responding to this call Jesus has on their lives to take seriously discipleship and mission. People start spending their money differently, spending their time differently, reorganizing their homes differently, buying bigger kitchen tables so they can have more people around the table, more food on the table, bigger refrigerators, be able to stock that baby so they can have an open home, an open fridge, an open table. That's when you know these things are catching, when these things are sinking in, when people start stewarding their stuff, their homes, their kitchens, their kids, when they start stewarding them in the light of this, where it's not an add-on, if they can wedge in a little mission.
So number 7 on the metrics is generous living.
Good.
Growing generosity and living.
Generosity. Good.
Great one.
So the church shared all things in common.
How could we say that? How could we say that though? I want to qualify that.
Measurable, sure.
How could we say that so that because people are like, oh, we get a lot of money, we get a lot of money to overseas missions. Good thing. Good
Growing
thing.
to see all of their town council treasurers as of the board to be used by them for whatever purpose. That's the pretty big no.
Well, I think I did. My only point is let's connect it up
Okay, yeah.
and say something like generous missional lives, which we know in that is going to mean
As gospel recipients of
It is.
all of what God's given to use everything for the mission of God. That's a lot.
Our lifestyle is
generous missional lifestyle. Because then it's more than just money, which is good.
Developing the gospel DNA.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're looking for ways to give. Instead of just, here's an opportunity.
Well, again, it's generosity connected with their personal lives on mission,
Yeah.
not just give to the church to do their missions project, which again it's not the worst thing. Just we want to see people increasingly again personally their personal lives be generous as they are in these communities on mission together.
I think you would see that. I mean, if you have somebody that has a genuine heart change towards missional living, you'll see them doing things. You'll see them opening their home. You'll see them going up
Yeah.
and inviting people out. So, I mean, it is very measurable in that sense that you will see the people in this actually walking it out. You know, it's not just lip service.
Yeah.
You'll see them going up and talking to people and saying, hey, why don't you come over for dinner? You know, and opening their home for different
Yep.
things. So, I mean, that would be the way to measure it is, I mean, are you actually seeing them walk out missional living in their own lives?
Yeah.
You know, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking back as we were talking about the old metrics. Maybe it's not about completely different metrics. Maybe it's just shifting it over a little bit. Instead of counting the butts on Sunday morning, counting the bodies in the missional community groups or in the DNA groups. I mean, even the budget, you know, we talk about how much goes through the church, but what is the missional community groups money going toward? I don't know. I mean, maybe that's how the devil has blinded us, just by a percentage of moving us a little bit too much to the left, and then it's become about us. I mean, baptisms. I mean, I had an evangelist come through my church 20 years ago, and he wanted to know how many we had baptized, you know, because that's how he was going to sell himself to the next church. But did we disciple those 100? I mean, how many? I mean, maybe it's just off a degree. You get lost if you're in the ocean and you go 2 or 3 degrees, you're lost. Maybe I don't know. That makes sense to me.
Well, I think part of it too is comfort.
Yeah.
Like you were talking earlier, it's comfort. I mean, there's a lot of churches. I've talked to several pastors that since COVID began, and they went to online services, and now they're trying to reopen the churches and such that people just aren't coming back to church. You know, they got comfortable being home. They got comfortable being able to watch it on TV and not have to worry about getting up, getting dressed, going to church. Before COVID, it was a comfort thing. You can go in on Sunday morning, check off I did my religious obligation for the week, check off that box and go about life. This takes people out of their comfort zone. And I think it's not so much that this is such a radical idea. This is not a radical idea. Read Acts. I mean, this is how Jesus created the church. This was the church back when Jesus was starting his movement during his ministry. So this is not a radical idea. The difference is where people got comfortable.
Yeah.
And now it's trying to, I guess, go back to that time.
Yeah.
You know, they said Jesus and the disciples turned the world on its head. They turned the world upside down. This is going to do the same thing, and it's just going back to what Jesus originally told us to do to begin with.
It's the rechurching. It's the rechurching piece.
Yes.
It's where we got off the original vision, or original calling, original organization of the church, and defaulted into formal.
We went back to the temple.
Yeah. Temple.
We settled for safe over messy.
Temple mode. There's a question back there. Let me say quick comment to your. So I heard some research last week. Yes, as if we weren't in a bad enough place.
Yeah, more bad news.
Yeah, more bad news is Barna is saying 25% of churchgoers will not come back to the church now because they're being online. They're being offered online church as an option. So it used to be where like the lowest expectation or lowest bar was church attendance Sunday morning. Now it's going a step or two lower to say stay home on your couch in your pajamas
Checking in on Facebook.
with your coffee, drop off of the online thing whenever you want to. It's like, so they said 25%, but the sad thing is it seems like churches are kind of feeding it where they're going to be okay with it. Say, man, look at the numbers. Look at the numbers that are viewing us online. I'm talking with a pastor in Costa Mesa, Orange County, 2 weeks ago. He's excited about it. It's like, look at the views we got. Look at the number of people that are watching.
So that's his metric of success.
And it's like, oh man, we're going from bad to worse. As if Sunday only attendance, was the low bar. Now it's Sunday on your couch.
Let's move it a little bit back. Who wasn't already back enough?
Sunday on your couch in your pajamas. It's like, so anyway, a lot of rechurching to do, folks. A lot of rechurching. Mike, you got a comment?
Comment on the rechurching thing. I think we've, and unintentionally, mission projects or mission morning or mission trips have been that metric of on mission. And we had a lady her husband over, and she was. And I always encourage our people. Sundays we always have time of sharing, and but she never shared the story, so she's sharing. Yeah, we. So I've always wanted our people to engage in missions, and so she's telling the story of how she's been ministering to her neighbors who aren't believers, and she never had a Bible with her name on it, so they got a Bible on it, and she's not one of these like really vulnerable people, and so she texted her husband, and her husband texted Chad and said, you know what, that meant the world to my wife that you would go out of your way to get a Bible. And I asked Sherry, I said, why is this the first time you're hearing about that? This is what we do as a church. And she said, well, I just didn't think it was that important because it's not a mission project. Going, but what you did was significant. And I think again, kind of researching our people and the definition of what missions is. And so it's not a decision, but it's not a project, it's a person.
Good. So in order to re-church a lot of people, they're going to have to hear a lot of stories like that. Churches are always asking you, how do you re-church? Like, you tell those stories. You talk about new metrics. You talk about what counts. Like, that really counts. They were thoughtful, generous, relational in that. That is good stuff. We've got to tell those stories regularly so that people understand, man, that's the real stuff. So tell those stories, capture those stories on video, short videos, 1, 2, 3 minutes long. Show them put them on Facebook, on your website. Basically redefine. Again, the rechurching is redefining what counts.
Yeah.
Redefining what community and family looks like. It's redefining what mission looks like. It's redefining what generosity and hospitality looks like. So, but you're gonna have to double down on telling the stories, because it's in the stories that these things become normal. If you just talk about it occasionally, you just tell a few occasional stories, it's still going to be like something the special class of Christians do. Not, oh, that was just a normal person who went out of their way in a generous, thoughtful way. They're just like me. You know, we've got the same amount of money, we've got the same lifestyle, we've got the same neighborhood, we've got the same, and what they did, we could do that tomorrow. It's normalizing it. But the normalizing comes in telling lots of stories. So, figure that out again for your context. I'm a firm believer in like short little video stories. If you've got people that aren't comfortable, like getting up in front, telling a story for 2 or 3 minutes, figure out a way to capture it a little safer. They can do 2 or 3 takes where they're telling the story, because it doesn't take long to film it. And you don't need great equipment to have it look good enough, but powerful. So, good stuff. 407.
Hey, you sent a link to your website, but why don't you tell them real quick before we pray or whatever we break about a little bit about your website and some of the stuff that's on there, the wealth of missional community information that's on there.
Yeah. Everything we've talked about has tools and things connected with it. Yeah, on the site. You know, it all came. Everything on the site, it's on the front here, just missionalmadesimple.com. All of that has grown out 20 years of having hundreds of conversations like this with leaders around the world. Like, I can point to a lot of specific tools on there, and it's like, man, after I was in Chile with a bunch of leaders in Chile and having the same conversation over and over and over, it was like, oh, I think that tool would be helpful. Etched it out on a piece of scrap paper on the plane on the way back from Santiago, Chile, or when I was in Russia a year and a half ago. Multiple conversations, same theme with these Russian leaders. It's like, oh, I think we could create a simple little something that's going to help with that. That's what the site is full of. Things like that. So, and the reason I was talking about the video idea, I've got a lot of 1 and 2 minute videos on there. Short, bite-sized little pieces. Because if you try to like fire hose this with your people, that's not going to go well. The fire hose option usually doesn't end well with your people. You got to give them bite-sized pieces, work it out a little bit, talk about it a little more. Next bite. Chew on it, talk about it a little bit more, work it out. Next bite. That's how you're going to re-church. That's how you're going to help these people grow up to become core type people. Again, we have a tendency to try to speed up processes. So even you might be feeling this pressure, you got this new group of people, want to see something big happen fast, and you're like, read these 10 things, we're going to talk about these 10 things, versus saying, how about if we do 1 or 2 this month, go deep, get real clarity, set some action steps, work it out, and then next month, next bite.
It's too slow. You need to get it's way too slow.
My bride and I have been working through those videos, and I find them to be very, very practical. To be honest with you, I didn't know how much substance was going to be in the time that they were show. Like I'm thinking 2 minutes. This is going to be some kind of like watered down ad or something.
Infomercial.
And come to find out that they actually really are very informative and practical. I appreciated them, and especially you putting them in that consumable fashion. So it's been very beneficial.
Yeah. So don't just have your people watch it and then move on. Again, that's a problem with a lot of training in a lot of churches. Get together, 9-hour training or 90-minute training thing, move on. Everybody goes home, they don't revisit it. I was with those guys in Norman last night, had a great conversation with them, hour and a half, whatever we were together. I told Jeremy, it was like, tonight will have very little value if you don't pull them all together very soon, next week, and unpack it all. Talk about it in your context, set some clear action steps. Tonight will be largely a waste, I told him, if you do not do that very soon. And he took it to heart. He was like, yeah, gonna pull together all our mission community, core leaders, very soon, next week, sometime in the next 2 weeks, and basically take those ideas and work it out in our context. If you don't, that stuff just, you can say all the right stuff in the right ways, but if you don't help people process, let it seep, soak, if they don't soak in it, won't catch. Just blows off. Because people have so much information coming from so many different sources. Think about it on a daily basis. This would just be one more. Just bounces off. So you got to process it with them, and then you got to keep processing it with them. It's not one time. It's repeat. You were saying it. That person in your church has heard certain things from you many times, and yet was still, it's normal for some people. Normal. I mean, it's a parenting, discipleship is a lot like parenting, and it's such a parenting principle.
Yeah.
Someone came up the other day with my 16-year-old son. Kid's smart. So it's not a brain issue. Okay? But I was like, Elijah, how many times have we talked about that? 50? 60? How many times? And yet, it's as if you've never considered it.
That's like disciples talking to Jesus.
Yeah.
He said, have you not been with me?
Well, exactly.
Have you not been with me?
All the miracles they saw at that point.
So show us the Father. Have you not been with me?
It's like, how slow are you guys? But that's part of the discipleship parenting reality. We're going to have to repeat, remind, encourage, and we all need it. We all get distracted, lose sight, forget. That's why we need a community around us that talks about the right things all the time. So, create that culture in your churches. Please. Let me pray that for you. Father, thanks for today. Such a good conversation. Father, we think of all the people represented by these churches, and even more you want them to reach in the weeks and months ahead. This represents a lot of people and a lot of potential good fruit or a lot of potential pain and dysfunction. So Father, I pray that we would take these things very seriously, take these things to heart, constantly be asking how we can re-church and just disciple more effectively. Father, I think of all the people represented here, all the very normal people, normal lives, normal families. Father, I pray that you would change hearts. This kind of life together, living as family on mission, comes from heart conviction around these things. But we can't produce that in people. You can. You do. Help us do what we can do. Be good stewards. Be faithful examples. Help us be consistent in that, but we ask for your help to change hearts, change minds, give people a much bigger vision for the church, give them a much bigger vision for the purpose of their lives, that it's not the pursuit of the American dream, but it's your dream to see many disciples fill these cities and the state. That's your vision. So please give that to them. Increase faith, increase boldness, increase their love for each other as the church, increase their love for the lost. Pray that their hearts would be broken for lost people, lost co-workers, lost neighbors, lost families from their kids' school and their kids' sports. Pray that you would produce that change in their hearts and minds, in all of our hearts and minds. We ask for more of that. And Father, we ask these things for your glory, not for our fame, not to prove anything. We've got nothing to prove. We're your loved sons. So we get to pursue all this freely. With freedom, with excitement, for your glory. Father, I also pray for protection for each of these men. Protect them physically, protect them spiritually. When they start to move in these directions, there will be opposition. Opposition probably from people they thought were brothers and sisters. Opposition from unexpected places. Unexpected even from their own hearts, as they doubt themselves, as they doubt their gifting, as they doubt their calling. So I pray for protection around all of that. And I pray that you would give them significant spiritual resource to be able to love generously and proclaim Jesus boldly. So please provide that spiritual resource as well. So Father, thank you for loving us so well. Pray that you'd send us out from here to love well in your name. We love you and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.